Good morning, everybody. Welcome to episode 4 of the Sativa Segment. My name is Richard Cheng. I am your host. So, we have a very interesting guest, but before we get into that, I wanted everybody to know that this episode is fueled by, once again, Dads at Peace, which is a men's resource center that I started here in Dallas, Texas, about a little bit over a year ago. If you want to learn a little bit more about it, go to Dads at Peace on Facebook. Thank you so much for making the time to be on the show.
Yeah, thank you, man. Thank you so much for inviting me out to be here. It's a little rainy this morning on my way down from Oklahoma, but I'm here.
Okay. All right. Well, we've known each other for a while, right?
Yes, sir. To give you a little background on me,
Yep.
I grew up. My grandparents and my mother and everybody, they all came from Mexico, originally border town near Del Rio. And they came to start a better life, to present a better life for their kids, and eventually that would lead down to me. And
Did you grow up in Del Rio?
No, I actually grew up in Fort Worth. I was born in Fort Worth at John
Okay.
Peter Smith Hospital, and then I literally grew up probably about 3 blocks away from that same hospital
Oh, wow. Okay.
for a good chunk of my life.
Okay.
So it was more of the, impoverished neighborhoods. There was a lot of gang violence and stuff going on there. We had gang members living across the street from my grandmother's house and being caught up in
Right.
crossfire of, drive-by shootings and stuff like that. And so, it eventually my mother was able to pull us out of that whole life, and she got married, and we ended up moving out into the suburbs and going to school out there. And it's kind of a hard transitional change for me.
Yeah.
From going from like the urban school to the suburban school, because I wasn't really accepted.
Well, so let's talk about that. You said before you came on the show, I kind of prepped you a little bit saying, hey, David, how much can I ask? You said I can ask anything I want.
Sure.
And so I'm going to go ahead and ask you, were you part of a gang?
No,
Okay.
I wasn't a part of any gangs at all. Fortunately, I did hang out with a lot of them
Okay.
growing up, but my uncles and them, they never got caught up in the gang life either. But even though they associated and affiliated, and they would come over and hang out, I never got into gang affiliation, and I'm really glad I didn't.
Sure. So we go from an urban area, obviously a very different environment than a suburban area. So you made that transition. What was the comparison and the contrast between, I guess, your friends and how your life changed when you made that move?
It was actually pretty hard because, going into that suburban neighborhood, everybody's kind of like somewhat kind of hoity-toity.
Okay.
And so you kind of, you got to dress nice. If you don't have these certain clothes, and everybody looks at you like, you're almost like don't exist, or,
Okay.
you have. The social acceptance was pretty hard and challenging for me. I don't think I fared very well in that environment. I mean, even at one point, it got so bad that one year, I think it was my 5th grade year, like I got into a fight with one kid, and then before I know it, I end up on the ground, and like half the school in my grade is like kicking me while I'm on the ground.
Okay.
And I feel like a lot of that had to do with the fact that I was just this kid from a different, I didn't grow up around all these other kids. And the girls, took to me because I was a new guy. So I think that was a lot of what I dealt with too as well, because girls were interested in me being a new guy. And the guys that were there, popular, whatever you want to call it, didn't take to me very well because that attention came towards me and not them.
Well, there was a new rooster in town.
Basically.
Yeah.
So, it wasn't until I started going back I was in Crowley originally, and then I started going back to Fort Worth schools after my mother went through a divorce. And that was pretty hard for me, that divorce, because it was also the time that I realized, my mother had told me that my father wasn't my real father. And so that was a really hard thing for me to deal with and cope with. And looking back in my life, that was probably like the second point in my life that I realized I had problems. Didn't know how to
How
cope
old
with
were
these
you around
things.
this time?
So that would have been, let's see, that was middle school. It was like 6th grade year, so I might have been like 12.
Okay. So you were 12 and you were entering into your teenage years. This is preteen.
Right.
Let's when did you get involved with cannabis?
Cannabis started back when I was a little bit younger, 7. In
Okay,
all
so
honesty.
this is the interesting part, right? I mean, is that you were introduced to cannabis at a very young age,
Right.
arguably around first grade,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So between first grade and eighth grade, or I guess around seventh
Sixth-
grade,
sixth,
sixth or
yeah.
seventh grade. So for those 5, 6, 7 years, were you using pot, or did you see other people use pot?
I mostly saw the consumption of pot in
Okay.
between that time period. When at 7 years old, it was actually the first time that I ever took a hit of cannabis.
Okay.
And I used to bug my uncles all the time. Like for me, my attraction to cannabis was always the smell. Going back as a kid, I remember clear as day my uncle and them would be hanging out on the porch with their friends and they're partying and drinking and they were smoking, right? Well, I thought the smoking was just part of, like cigarettes, but I always found it really unique and interesting that what they were smoking had this very, very distinct smell that, strangely enough, being that young, I found really attractive.
Did they tell you, hey, David, this is an illegal drug, or
No, they just told me that there was something that it wasn't for me. That you're too young for this.
So they did try to deter you from it.
They did,
Okay.
and me being the pursuant little brat that I was back then, because I was an only child, I was pretty persistent till finally. It wasn't my uncle; it was my uncle's friend that actually let me take a puff.
Okay.
At
So it was
7.
a friend of the family
Right.
that handed you the joint.
Right.
You took a puff.
Right.
Now, at age 7, did you consistently use it in the next however many
No,
years?
after that, it was just kind of like, okay. I think I was too young really to understand what it was that was going on. I just knew that at that time I was really desiring the smell. So when I smoked for the first time, I don't ever actually remember like being high, and I probably was. And I know they were getting a good laugh of me,
Sure.
after the fact, but it wasn't until when I got into middle school, high school, and started consuming more, because a lot of that was influenced by the peers that were around me at the time. And growing up, people were smoking too and skipping school. When we got into high school, that's kind of the path that I started going down. And a lot of that had to do with because I was dealing with some verbal abuse at home with my stepfather at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't know it till after the fact, but he turned out to be pretty racist and very controlling. And I don't know how my mom totally missed that, but we were kind of subjected there for a few years to I'd say a lot of torture in a sense.
Okay.
Because he was trying to come in and make things his own, and my mother was so independent and had been strong on doing things for herself that she just wasn't really trying to give everything over to somebody.
Was there domestic abuse?
It was mostly, I wouldn't say physical. I never actually saw it. It did get physical between me and him, but I never saw any physical between him and my mother, and that was pretty hard on me, because at that time I'm in high school, so it only kicked in my rebellion even more. And to the point to where at one point I felt like my mother was choosing him over me. So that was a whole nother situation that I had a hard time dealing and coping with. And so I started I guess you can say, acting out and going and doing things that I wasn't proud of, doing, drugs, hard drugs, and hanging out with all those hard social circles, and just trying to, I guess, in a way, kind of hurt myself, but like numb everything else that's going on around me. And I'd like to try to say that I tried to take my own life, but I never really attempted. I mean, I did attempt once, not a couple, but once. But it was very foolish, and the moment I started to try to going down that path is when I realized, like, what the heck are you doing?
Right.
And
that must have been a really dark time for you.
Yeah, it was probably the darkest time in my life in that era. From like about 16 to about 22 was probably the darkest, lowest part of my life. And it took a lot to get out of that. I had to really look within myself, because I was too embarrassed to talk about any of the things that I experienced. I didn't want to talk about any of it, and so I had to dig within myself and like figure these things out. So I didn't go to no psychiatrist, no psychologist. I didn't do therapy or anything. I bravely tried to do this all on my own, and I feel like I was successful at it, because here I am now, standing before you, or sitting with you, talking with you now, and there's a lot of good things that have come out of that. It's like my stock, hit the bottom,
Sure,
and now I'm bouncing back, and I've been only going up with occasional drops here and there, but nothing as low as that was in my life.
So, obviously you've had some challenges. Be it family, your mother telling you about your dad's situation, your stepdad consuming drugs. When did that transition over to? Because this is what you told me, is that you've dealt drugs.
Yeah.
You've sold.
Yeah.
You've have you trafficked? Have you gone across state lines?
I have.
Okay.
I did.
So, I mean, honestly, this episode is really talking about some really hard issues, right?
Of course.
It's not just you, it's millions of Americans who have faced similar situations. But I really want to probe and kind of dig this out, and that you have had a criminal past. You're a convicted felon.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So when did you start selling? When did you start dealing?
That was in the dark ages for me. So it's probably about 16, 17 years old. I started more on the hardcore drugs side of things. There was, methamphetamines was big at that time. And
okay, so you didn't deal just cannabis,
right?
It was other stuff in addition to cannabis. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not proud of it, but it's the path that I went down, and in a way, I'm glad that I did go down those paths and hang out with all those different social circles, because in doing that, because I already knew somewhere deep down inside, this isn't who I was, but I had to go through all those situations in order to see and like recognize, like, nope, not this circle. Nope, not this circle.
It was trial and error for you.
It was very trial and error, because I didn't have a father figure in my life. I didn't know who my father was. You know what I mean? So no, I didn't have nobody to lay those things out for me. My uncles were caught up in alcoholism and drugs themselves, and my grandfather was the only light in my life that I had, because he was constantly going to work every day, putting food on the table, doing what, looking back, to me, felt like he was trying to, create this opportunity for his family.
Right.
And so, it's been a very challenging in that sense, trying to come out of that, because when you're going through that, a lot of times you've got like the good thing and the bad thing on your shoulder, and like you can be your own worst enemy. And I think that was part of my struggle, is that I was my own worst enemy while trying to help myself get through all of this. And I just got to that point to where I saw, like, I don't want to be a part of these things anymore. I see the devastating effect that it's having in other people's lives. And consciously, I just couldn't live consciously like that, knowing that I was contributing to that. And through all of that, cannabis was one of the two drugs that stuck out to me, that the social circles were a lot more, they were more unified than they were every person for themselves. So you start.
It was a community.
It was yeah. I saw more community within cannabis, ecstasy, MDMA, and hallucinogens, LSD, and mushrooms.
Is it because there were just more people who created more dialogue amongst each other? Or
Yeah,
tell me about that.
People were willing to talk more about it, you know, and people were open more about their experiences. And I saw more fellowship and like trying to make, care for people in a manner where, whether it's, oh, you took too much, or like, we're here to help you, like with ecstasy, you take ecstasy and like, you definitely want some kind of supervision, or you want to be around a group of people that you can trust, because sometimes you can go into a state that like doesn't seem like reality. Right. And when you're trying to find yourself in that, you need to have other people around that you can trust.
Sure.
Right.
So let's transition back to the selling.
Right.
Who are you selling it to, and how did you get your supply?
Are we talking about cannabis?
Yeah, we're talking about. Let's just stick with cannabis for right now. Okay.
So, with cannabis, for me, I really started getting into cannabis right after the tail end, when California had just went medically legal.
Okay.
And
this is around 96.
Yeah, it's around 96, 97. Okay. So it's when I'm in high school. And it wasn't until like the tail end of high school that I said, you know what, I want to start trying to sell weed to people, but I want to sell something that's different, right? Because everything that I see is all brick weed, weed from Mexico. Like, I want to get access to this stuff that's coming from California. And being involved in those social circles, I eventually met somebody that was in that social circle. And I was doing some other things at the time that I'm not too proud of. Excuse me. That led me into dealing cannabis, because somebody saw me and gave me the opportunity and presented me with basically an ounce and was like, "Hey, do you think you can sell this?" And it was beautiful weed, and it smelled great, and I know what good weed looks like compared to bad weed. And
how do you tell good weed between good and bad?
I mean, the biggest thing for me is like what I told you. My first encounter with cannabis was the smell.
Okay, so is it the terpenes?
A lot of it was terpenes, and then look.
The coloration.
Yeah, the coloration. Okay. How fluffy it was versus back then where I was coming from, it was mostly always brick weed. Very seldom would you get some stuff from Mexico that actually was nice full buds and not all squished and compressed. Mm-hmm. And so, seeing it like that, it's like, oh, we're going from this to that. It's night and day. Can
you tell how strong weed is by looking at it?
No,
you can't.
You cannot.
Can you tell if there's something wrong with it just by the looks of it, or do you need really like a lab analysis?
Back then, because we didn't have lab analysis, it was kind of like the roll of the dice, right?
Yeah.
So that's why it was really important to go off of smell and look, right? Because that was, if it smelled good mm-hmm. and it looked good, chances are it was created and made good. And you would see the fluctuations of that when, people would bring me different stuff, and I'd be like, and they'd want me to pay the same price point that I was paying for something that was really good. And, then they'd give me the lower price point, and sure, fine, I'll take it. And then I go and take it and I go and sell it out to my friends, and I'm giving it to them for a lower price, but they're like, man, that other stuff that you got was amazing. And so it has to do with a lot of feedback, right?
Okay.
And
So
because
is it
me as a seller, right? I don't want to go and I'm not going to be in business long if I continue to sell, bunk crap, basically.
That's right. Because
Right.
essentially, it's the black market, but you have a
Right.
brand yourself, right?
Exactly. It's a
within that
credibility.
community that you're talking about.
Exactly.
You do have a brand. It's essentially bad PR. So
it's your name is your credibility,
Yeah.
So if everybody knows that Flores doesn't have, good weed, so and so's got the good weed. With me, it was always Flores always got the good weed. He doesn't charge the highest price and he doesn't give you the lowest price. He gives you that price right in the middle, and it's consistent throughout.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that's kind of how I set my, my little business model at that time when I was doing things. And as I continued to do that and I saw people were coming back and giving me that feedback, that's when I really kind of started looking into more of like, studying this plant more, studying the botany of it, studying, how it grows, where it came from, the history of it. And that's when I really started catching the bug for it. And that's how I started getting out of all of these other bad social circles. Between cannabis and hip hop culture, those are the two things that saved my life.
So would you say hip hop culture and cannabis has a close affinity towards each other?
Absolutely, 100%, because there's a lot of cannabis consumption going on within the hip hop culture.
Okay. So you really became a student of the industry.
Yes.
You became a connoisseur of both growing and identifying what's quality and what's not quality. You sold,
Right.
so you derived revenue from it. Now let's talk about your convictions.
Right.
You're a convicted felon.
Yes, sir.
There's no hiding it. You are a convicted felon. You are a past criminal.
Yes, sir.
How long were you in jail?
Well, I've been to prison twice.
Okay.
So this last time, which I got out in 2015, I did 18 months on a 3-year sentence.
Okay.
And then the remainder time I was on parole.
So you said twice. So what was the first stint?
The first stint was only 11 months. It was a state jail felony. But I had to do day for day on that. So I didn't get out on any parole or anything like that. I did 11 months straight.
11 months. And the second time was a 3-year sentence.
A 3-year sentence.
But you only did 18 months.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
Were both stints because of cannabis charges?
Yeah, they were possession charges.
Possession charges.
Yeah, possession of cannabis, all behind the wheel. So I never got caught up for any of my cultivation that I did in Texas for.
So you were never charged with selling.
No,
You were just simply.
I did that all under the radar from my teenage years to about 28. 28 was when I caught my first felony.
Okay, so we're looking at 11 months plus 18 months. So we're looking at 29 months of jail time.
Yeah.
For just possession.
Just possession.
What are your thoughts on the recent pardoning by President Biden?
I think it's definitely a good small step in that direction. It helps anybody who's gotten federal possession charges.
Because he didn't pardon the people who got convicted for selling or trafficking.
Right.
He pardoned the people for possession.
Possession. Correct.
So you did 29 months. He pardoned a bunch of people for arguably the same crime that you got convicted for that you did 2 stints for.
Right.
Okay.
But
So
on a federal level compared to a state level.
Okay. Were both your state levels here in Texas or was it in Oklahoma?
They're in Texas.
They're in Texas. Okay. Were they at the same jail? Same facility?
No, I went to 2 different facilities.
Tell me about that. Tell me about your experience in jail.
Man, it was traumatizing.
Yeah.
It was very traumatizing. The first time I went down and did those 11 months, it was also the same year, I believe it was 2010, where we had It was over, I believe it was like 40 something days of triple degree digit weather. And in these prisons that they have, these facilities, at the time, they didn't have swamp coolers or water coolers in there. Now they have them because after that year, they had multiple deaths across all these units because there wasn't enough air circulation and airflow in there. And so I spent my time in there basically in a hot box that was so hot that it was there was nothing but humidity all in there. It was like 120 degrees every day straight. They would
Mm.
only bring in 1 5 gallon jug of water with ice a day. Sometimes we wouldn't get that, and it would create a lot of unease and tension when you're in a room with 64 other inmates. And it was torture, man. It was one of the most dreadful things that I had ever experienced in my whole entire life, and it was extremely traumatizing. Very, very, very traumatizing.
In your cell, did you have to share
I
with?
didn't have my own cell. They basically had us in a big dorm. So you
Okay.
had a big dorm, and then you had like these cupboards,
Okay.
these little cupboards, and it was me and one other, actually me and three other inmates in one cupboard. And so again, it was so hot in there and it's so humid. I was stripped down to my clothes, and literally I was still just drenched in sweat.
Wow. What?
I'd be walking around in this day room, and there was like literally no air circulation. There was one fan moving, one exhaust fan moving,
Hmm.
and you could go and take a shower, right? But they kept the shower so hot that as soon as you got out of the shower, you were immediately sweating. So it was just completely dreadful the whole entire time.
Did you ever feel like your life was in danger, or that you were ever in danger in while you were in jail?
I never felt like I was in danger, and that was kind of a bad thing because I got into several fights while I was there because I wasn't going to put up with no shit from anybody. Excuse my language. But I just knew that I was willing to stand my ground, and I had other friends at the time who had done prison time that
Yeah.
sat me down and kind of like prepped me. And so I tried to do the best to follow those guidelines without causing too much trouble for myself along the way.
Got it. Okay. So let's transition into the industry. So we've touched on your personal life. Obviously, we talked about some dark moments. We talked about your past convictions, how you got into cannabis. What are your thoughts about the industry now? It's very different than when you got into it. Now, 19 states have some form to different degrees of adult use. Many other states that do not have adult use, such as Oklahoma, which is where you are, only has medical. What are your thoughts about the evolution of this industry from where you started to where it is today, from your perspective?
I'm really happy to see it come this way. When I decided to get involved in the selling aspect of it, I saw the benefit of it. I mean, the main reason why I got into it was because obviously there was good money to be made, but the secondary behind that I picked up was I saw how it was helping other people in their lives based on their reactions and their feedback that they came back and gave me. And so that's what really got me hooked on, was like, wow, this really can help people in a lot of different ways. And that's when I started studying it more, and I thought to myself, this can be an industry for sure. It needs to be. Like, this is crazy, this is heinous. And we're in the early 2000s, and I see what's going on in California, and I'm like, wow, I can't wait for that to actually start making its way across the nation and hopefully here in Texas.
So, how did you respond when 2012 hit and Colorado became the first state to legalize adult use? Did you have, any thoughts about moving out to Colorado, or did you have any thoughts
Yes,
about
I
that?
did. Unfortunately, at that time, because I was a convicted felon by then, by the time I
Yeah.
caught the bug of like, okay, I do want to step into this. I want to work in the industry, like legitimately, legally. And when I started doing that, then that's when I started running into these fences or these brick walls, as we would say, is basically, hey, we got a 10-year statute of limitations on felons. You can't work in our industry.
Okay.
And
So
so
there were
I
some other challenges
Yeah,
too.
those were some major challenges that I faced trying to get into the industry that basically since then, up until about 2 or 3 years ago, I decided to just do a lot of investing in myself. You know, I I did an online program called I think it's called TCMI, the Cannabis Medical Institute. And that was also the same time that my mother was going through cancer.
Mm.
And so I wanted to know more about the plant from that standpoint. And so I started educating myself more. I started going to conferences more, basically trying to do all the groundwork and the prep work of when I did hit my 10-year mark, that
Mhm.
I would be pretty suited up and educated and like grounded within what the legal industry looks like.
Have you hit your 10-year mark yet?
This 2023 will be my 10-year mark.
Oh, early congratulations.
Yes, thanks.
Um, so it sounds like you have some family connections too on the medical side.
Yes.
Um, obviously you consumed, you were obviously selling, but now the industry is completely different, man.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you know, you have certain states that have very broad medical programs with 30 plus qualifying conditions. You have some that have, just a handful. Um, how have you seen through your personal experiences how cannabis has affected people um, in their lives from a medical standpoint? Because it does sound like you have some knowledge on the medical aspects of it, not just selling from the
Right.
in the black market, not just consuming through recreational purposes, but you are involved on the medical side as well.
I appreciate you identifying that too, Richard, because that was something that early on I recognized that when I tried to talk to professionals and tell them where who I am, where I came from, I didn't get very much recognition or generating conversations. It wasn't until I actually started going to conferences, educating myself more, and speaking more on that platform, did people start taking me more serious and wanting to look at me more as an industry professional and not just some black market grower.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, when I first moved out to Oklahoma, I went out to Oklahoma because Oklahoma only had a 5-year statute of limitations on convicted felons.
Okay.
And I had met that qualification just this last year. So when I went out there, I went out to manage a dispensary. And so I was very, very adamant about being patient driven and trying to help patients dial in what works for them and, educating them with content. I would make sure that they would leave with papers educating on them on the different cannabinoids in the plant and the different terpenes in the plant, because I wanted patients there to understand that it's not all about the THC and that there's these other important compounds that are just as beneficial as THC, that can be helpful to you. And once you start looking at the analysis or the certificate of analysis of what it is you're consuming, you can start dialing in and seeing, oh, well, this worked for me because it had CBN, CBG,
Mm-hmm.
THCV, it had, the myrcene, terpenoline, ocimene, it had these different combinations. And so that when I started doing that with patients and educating them from that standpoint, I started noticing in the dispensaries patients coming back and actually finding more consistency in the products that they were using.
Right. And I think we've really just scratched the surface in this industry on the studies of the different cannabinoids and what it does medically, right?
Yes,
You
sir.
mentioned CBN, CBG. I think it wasn't too long ago, they did a study on CBG, or maybe it was CBN. It was one of those. Um, that it had a direct link to sleep patterns.
CBN.
CBN. Okay.
Yeah.
See, I'm just a lawyer, man. So I am not the chemist. So
Neither am I.
yeah, but it's interesting how much this industry has evolved, right?
Right.
And so if I were to ask you right now, because the industry is what it is, it's regulated. What is it that you're doing differently, or how is it different now for you compared to before when it was just the black market? And we talked about this,
Yeah,
right?
you know, the thing is,
Would you be doing anything different?
well, back then it was like, oh man, this stuff is really bomb. I can't wait for you. Smell this, right? Smell it. And usually that was the selling point. Once they smelled it and was like, oh my gosh, and then looked at it and was like, oh my gosh, like this has to be great quality, flower. Now you're talking about you're in a market where like it's kind of half and half, but like you have more consistency of good product to choose from, right? So whereas back then, you only had maybe 2 or 3 different strains to be able to choose from based on who your dealer was, and sometimes you only had one strain, right? Well, in this market, you have all the strains out there that you have access to, and so it's like a huge overload. But it's good for the patient though, because it allows them access to everything. And because obviously we don't have those studies out yet. We're doing a lot of anecdotal studies, based on
technology has changed the industry a lot,
right.
Technology and science, and how you're able to conduct analysis of the or the compounds and the different substances. So we're operating in a regulated regime now. It's a regulated framework compared to before, but as part of a regulated framework, it also leads to additional costs.
Yep.
And additional costs trickles downstream to the end user. So, really, what are your thoughts on the fact that before, when it was the illegal market, people can grow it for a fraction of the cost.
Right.
Now you can't, because
Right.
you have to have in Oklahoma, you have to use metric for tracking purposes, right? You have software, you have different tools for analysis, so that increases the cost. That increases the cost for the grower, for the processing portion, for the retailers. Thereby, the cost will eventually trickle down to the end user.
For me, the biggest thing that this is some of the conversations that I have with some of my friends that are still caught up in the black market, right? They don't want to transition over into the legal market because I'm not making the same amount that I would make here in this market. Well, and I always tell them, hey, bro, I'm tired of looking over my shoulder. I am done with that. Now that I have this opportunity to work in this industry legitimately, and I don't have my felonies aren't holding me back anymore, I will take less in order to be able to work and do what it is I know that I'm capable of doing, what I'm great at doing, and not have to worry about fear of being persecuted for it.
Right. And so that's really the cost for peace of mind.
Absolutely. It's totally worth that cost. And at the end of the day, I can say, yes, I'm doing this legally. Yes, I'm paying my taxes. Like, I don't have those things to worry about anymore.
Sure.
And at the end of the day, after you've been through what I've been through and many other people like me, it's worth the trade-off.
Well, they haven't been in the communal living with, 100-degree weather and, the stuff that you've experienced, right? So I think that may change your mind if you've experienced that. So, we've worked together on a few things. You mentioned the Oklahoma market, and you managed this grow operations.
So yeah, I went from the dispensary manager, managing this dispensary, into doing a grow operations, which you were really helpful out and all helping me getting the whole business outline structured for that. because at the time I wasn't able to get a license yet because of the 5-year limitations.
Sure.
And so, you know, you were, man, I was pretty amazed when I called you up that day and I was like, Richard, our license got rejected because of this right here. And, you know, help us out. You literally made a phone call, and within 24, 36 hours, our license was approved.
Well, I'm glad I could help you out in that situation,
So,
but you know, you guys deserve that license.
yeah,
So,
well, and I appreciate your help on helping some people that I was working with to get that license, because they themselves, they didn't really know how to pursue that, and they were struggling themselves on wanting to pay for a lawyer to do that, which, you know, I told you, which is why I went ahead and paid for it,
sure.
because I wanted to get this stuff clear out the way. Things didn't work out too well there, you know. It just, the operators had a different vision in mind, and the partner that I was with had a different vision from what we originally said we were going to go. And so, you know, we went and got that first season out the way, which was last season. And then I kind of started working back in Dallas for a little bit. And then I got presented with another friend of mine who's been in the industry as long as I have, longer. And he had an operation going out there and asked if I'd be willing to come out and work with him and help him run his operations. And so I saw that as a good opportunity to take that on as a learning experience firsthand.
Sure.
On top of what I just went through, because I wanted to have my own license. I wanted to be my own operator, right? And eventually I ended up getting my own license. I haven't really told anybody this yet. I guess this would be like my first public announcement of me having my own grow license. But I only got the license because of the 2-year moratorium that Oklahoma had put. And so I wanted to have that license for when I was actually ready to seek investment and actually pull the trigger. And so this, me working with Gas Giant now, has, I feel like, given me a huge advantageous lane to be able to go through everything firsthand. I'm basically being paid to learn how to run my own business.
Yeah, I mean, what the thing is, you went through a series of that though.
Yes.
I mean, when you and I started working on that, the license that you referenced earlier, you were really essentially a management company hired to come in to help with the cultivation aspect of it. It clearly didn't work out.
Right.
There were some, I guess we'll just leave it as incongruent objectives, right? Or
Yes.
it just wasn't a good fit. You left that venture and you joined Gas Giant, and with a gentleman that, as you referenced earlier, that has arguably more growing experience than you do, but he
Yeah.
already has a grow operations, and you're now operating that grow facility for him. What are some of the challenges with growing? Tell me about the grow aspect of it. What's involved with growing in a growing operations?
Man, you know, a lot of it is sticking to your schedule and your time. You know, you have your SOPs, and they're pretty standard. You know, everything, once you have the system in place, it's just really about making sure that you are operating in a manner that doesn't allow outs. Like right now, Gas Giant is all indoor cultivation, right? So when I came in, the processes were already in place. At this point, it's all about maintaining that, you know, so making sure that we're, you know, no pests are coming in, making sure that, you know, we're not allowing the plants to get overwatered and, you know, suffer from root rot or disease. You know, there's these little finite details that once the operation's going, you just really have to stay on top of all these little details. You know, a light may go out, you know, you have to replace that light. We're in LED now, so lights last longer compared to, you know, HPS lights, where you have to constantly change those out.
Does the plant or the quality of the plant get altered by using LED versus sunlight or different types of light? Does it affect the outcome of the plant?
Man, yes, definitely. That is a whole nother avenue and rabbit hole, just because you're talking about different spectrums, you're talking about different quality of, diodes that are in these products. You know, it's you definitely have to do a lot of due diligence and a lot of questioning when you're going and,
Mm-hmm.
like, say, picking out lights and stuff like that, because there are certain things that you're looking for, like, as a cultivator. I'm not going to give too much in specifics, but there are certain things as a cultivator when it comes to lighting that you're looking for, and all these different lighting companies have different lighting spectrums. Some
Mm-hmm.
actually even do custom lighting spectrums for you, which is a really great thing when you're have a certain plant, or you're working with certain strains that you want consistency in. Things like that can help that consistency when you know those little details.
Okay. So walk me through the grow process though. I mean, this is the fun part, right? Are you using actual seeds or do you using seedlings or
So we
how do
do.
you
So
how
we
do you get
do.
your hands on that?
We do both, right? So over at Gas Giant, Marcus is one of the few people in the world that has he's went to the regions, these land race regions. He went to South Africa, and he went and found the Durban poison and the Swaziland goat, and he's brought the Swaziland and Durban back to.
And those are names of the seeds?
Yes, because they're from those regions.
Okay.
And so he's used those. They're basically high sativas, and he's used that as a breeding program to breed into other genetics that are circulating here in the space. So in this operation, it's seeds, but then once we get our mothers and our actual the best strains from each of those seeds, our cultivars, um, from there, we'll go and use the cloning process, right? So we grow seeds to do the sifting process and find which ones are the best ones or meet the criteria that we're
How do you
looking
grow
for.
seeds? I mean, in basic agriculture, you start off with a seed, but help me understand how you grow a seed.
It's real simple with cannabis. There's multiple ways to go about it, but two of the ways that I've usually done it consistently in the past, and how we've done it now, is we'll either put them in straight water
Okay.
and allow, and within 48 hours the whole of the seed will crack, and you'll start to see the root come out of it.
Okay.
That's one way to do it. And then from there you go into whatever your medium is. If it's rock wool, if it's cocoa, if it's soil, you can go transition from that point, and that starts the growing process. Another process is, a lot of people use the paper towel method, and they'll fold a paper towel up, they'll
Okay.
put the seeds inside there, cover it up, wet the paper towel, put it inside of into a little plastic bag, and then within 48 hours it does the same thing. You'll start seeing the little root pop out, and then that's when you go into the transition phase. so
Wow. Okay.
so that's usually the beginning point. It's somewhat fairly simple, but it's also complicated too, because you're looking for things within that when it's doing that process, because it also, you're looking for signs of how strong the plant is, how vigorous it is, and it starts by observing at that early stage, and then it follows all the way through.
So how do you clone? Tell me about that. I mean, because you told me about the germination process and the growing
So
the
yeah,
seeds.
it's like I was saying, once you transplant that seedling into whatever the medium is that you're going into, um, it's you'll grow that up for, it can be 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 9 weeks, and eventually the plant will start getting big enough to where you can go and propagate it.
Okay.
Which means I can go and take a stem, like a
Mm-hmm.
6 or 7 inch stem, take a cutting off of it, dip it in some rooting hormone, and then put it in like a rockwool cube or something of that nature, a rapid rooter, and within 14 days, putting it within its own little dome and giving it its own little greenhouse.
That's right.
Within 14 days, you'll start seeing roots pop out from that plant. and then it basically is turned into a plant that you can use and put into the flowering cycle.
And you can use that clone to clone more and more and more.
Yeah, you can. You can. The problem there sometimes what ends up happening is if you don't clone off of good clones, the genetic vigor and strength can a lot of times decline.
I was just going to ask you about that.
Right.
Do you have to, it's
And
kind of
so
like making a copy of a copy, right?
Right,
So-
right. And so there are ways of resetting the hormones in the plant,
Okay.
right, to be able to get that plant back to its original state of what it was before it started to decline.
So it sounds like the goal was to get back to the original mother plant that you originally cloned off
Right,
of.
right.
Because each clone, if you don't manage it right, it can alter the THC level and everything else, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit. Let's get away from Gas Giant a little bit. And let's talk about your endeavor. Now, you actually have a license now, and your company is called
Supreme Flores.
Supreme Flores.
Yes,
and
sir.
it's based in Oklahoma. And you have a partner there.
Yes.
And so Oklahoma, as they have some restrictions on how much you can own.
Right.
You have to be an Oklahoma resident to own. I'm sorry. You have to, if you're out of state resident, you can own up to 25% of the company.
Correct.
Until you meet certain thresholds.
Right.
Have you met that threshold yet?
My threshold comes next month.
Oh, okay. So now, come next month, you don't have any restrictions.
I don't have any restrictions.
Okay. So tell me about Supreme Flores.
So Supreme Flores, the goal with Supreme Flores is I want to do contract growing,
Okay.
brand fulfillment for other companies.
What does that mean? Tell me what brand fulfillment means.
So, example like Cookies, okay? Cookies has a brand, right? Well, Cookies doesn't necessarily grow their own weed. They contract other growers to grow their weed for them.
Mm-hmm.
And what they do is they provide the genetics. And I think you're familiar with this because I think Cookies was even a client of yours.
They are, yes.
So just using that as an example, I thought at one point I wanted to try and build a brand, but given the fact that states like California and basically the whole Pacific Northwest has already on top of that, I saw it being more advantageous to do brand fulfillment that way because that'll get the money rolling faster in the operations to have those agreements already worked out with people. And then I don't have to worry about going and selling stuff out into the market. I'm not going to get the same price that I would going and sell into it, but I'm guaranteed that my crop is gone and sold every single time.
So just to circle back with that understanding is like a company like an MSO
Right.
would buy essentially from Supreme Flores.
Right.
You would be a supplier for, by the way, MSO, for those of you who are watching out there, it stands for multi-state operator. So a multi-state operator will come in and say, hey, David, we would like to buy X amount of plant from you.
Right.
And you would sell. And hopefully you land a good contract, right?
Right.
At premium prices.
Right.
And that becomes a source of revenue for you.
Right.
And obviously, as you grow, you're hoping to land other MSOs as a client.
That, and then, I really do pride myself on the genetics that I myself have been collecting throughout all these years. And so there is a part of me that wants to be able to put out my own craft flower in the market.
Okay.
Because the model behind that is more of like the wine model, right? And so that's another vertical that if I can get my contract going in and get the revenue generating, then I'll start looking into possibly putting out a craft brand, real small batch. And then another vertical that I'm interested in doing is this is a little bit more challenging, but I'd like to try to get into the real medical side of this and like working with doctors and physicians, and trying to find a doctor or a physician or somebody who's interested in running a dispensary and approaching it from a real medical standpoint and getting gathering that data and actually doing independent studies and
Mhm.
getting into trials and things of that
Now you're
nature.
speaking the language of the world I came out of, or
Right,
technically I didn't come out of anything. I came into the cannabis industry from the healthcare side, right?
right.
And so now I'm starting to see the two worlds collide. You're
Hmm.
looking at clinical studies, you're looking at efficacy of data. And in California, there's even limitations on how physicians can have a financial interest in dispensaries,
Hmm.
and that falls in line with the healthcare world and how physicians can have certain financial relationships and ownership of ancillary businesses, if you
Right.
will, right? And so the two worlds are obviously starting to mesh. You just expressed some interest into diving into some other verticals. Are those the two primary verticals that you're interested in? Once assuming Supreme Flores takes off, you generate revenue. Obviously, it takes money to make money,
Of course.
and then Project One is the I guess the specialized or craft flowers, right?
Right.
How did you decide that you want to do that?
Well, I decided I wanted to do that just because it's cannabis from a recreational adult use standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of the avenue that I wanted to choose to bring something that I know when people who know me in the space would more likely support that because it's bringing something different to the table compared to everybody else. My experience that I'm looking to bring in that craft product has a lot to do with the smell
Mm-hmm.
and the taste because that influences the experience that you have.
Okay.
And that's
Yeah.
what I'm using to drive
Right.
that particular product
Okay.
because I have access to genetics that not everybody has access to that allows me to carve that niche out for myself.
Well, because right now Oklahoma is just medical. It's not an adult use state.
But
Is
it operates like almost like a
because you can
recreation.
pretty much get
There's
anything for like a stub toe, right? There's really
yeah,
not.
it's like
I mean,
it's open conditions basically.
Yeah, so I mean, the qualifying conditions are pretty broad, as I
Correct.
always say. It's loosely defined in Oklahoma on what's deemed the true qualifying condition. Is the craft really geared towards the adult use? So,
Yeah, I believe so.
honestly,
Yeah, yeah. When it comes
okay,
to that, when I'm, especially working out there in Oklahoma, there's a lot of that going on. There's that, and then there's trying to sell it for the lowest
sure.
price possible.
You can always go to New Mexico, I mean,
Right.
so I mean, they have like these resorts along the border of New Mexico and Texas, which is I find pretty interesting. Um, as we're wrapping up, because we do, there is a time, there is some time considerations here, but are there any last words that you want to share for people who are listening to the episode about your past or about your business or about anything that you really want to share with us as kind of a last message for you?
You know, being somebody who's a legacy operator and being somebody who's been at the front lines of the prohibition and going through that, I think what I'm trying to do myself is I'm trying to merge and find people who don't have the same background as myself in history with cannabis, but respect and want to work with people like myself because it's those people like you who don't have that background, but I feel that can complement somebody like myself who has a lot of the experience and has the drive and the ambition because there's a lot of people out there like myself and that want to be able to work with people who don't have that history. And I think that's what's one of the transitional problems that I see going on in the space right now is, legacy operators only want to work with legacy people and, and it's very few legacy operators working with real business professionals that come from other industries. I'm one of those legacy operators that want to work with other people from other industries. but it's a two-way street.
It is, and
And it's tough because you get those people coming in and
it's very tough,
right?
Yeah, no, in myself, I've only been in the industry for 9 years, not anywhere close to you, right? And even in the 9 years that I've been in it, I've seen it really evolve. When I got into it, I would go to conferences, and it was a very different demographic compared to, I don't know, as of maybe 3-4 years ago, it started to evolve quickly.
Right.
So, hey man, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, man.
I really enjoyed having this conversation. I feel like we can have this conversation.
Dude, time went by so much faster than what I thought. Like, holy smokes, I thought there would be enough more time to cover stuff. But hey, maybe that's another episode later on down the line.
Yeah. Well, hey man, thank you for being on the show, and I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Richard.
Right. Thanks.